If you disappear the right way, he'll regret it forever. Do you know how many women a man forgets in his lifetime? Hundreds. Faces blurred by time. Names buried in digital archives. Conversations lost to the void. But then, there is her. The one he can't forget. Not because of how she loved him, but because of how she left. She didn't slam doors. She didn't plead. She didn't threaten to be missed. She simply vanished. Not as a tactic, as a transformation. He thought she'd wait, like the others. Thought she would orbit his silence. He mistook her stillness for weakness. He believed her patience was powerlessness. But stillness is not surrender. Sometimes it is the prelude to disappearance, a sacred pause before rebirth. You see, some women don't just walk away. They withdraw from the soul outward. They retreat not only from the man, but from the version of themselves that once begged to be seen. And that is what haunts him. Because what vanishes is not just a woman, but a mirror. The mirror he used to define himself. The mirror that once told him, "You are enough." But when she disappears the right way, silently, fully, without residue, that mirror shatters, and now he is left with himself, his own distorted reflection, his own echoing emptiness. Carl Jung wrote that people don't see the world as it is. They see it as they are. And when a woman becomes his projection, she is no longer real. She becomes the container for his unloved parts, the savior for his wounded boy, the muse for his fragile ego. But when that projection collapses, when she becomes real, sovereign, unavailable, he loses more than love. He loses himself. She didn't leave to punish him. She left to find herself. And that is the difference. The woman who disappears without the need to be missed becomes unforgettable. Because she doesn't disappear as a performance, she disappears as an initiation. She disappears into truth. She walks away not from him, but from the illusion of who she was with him. This is not about revenge. This is about individuation. The slow, painful peeling away of layers until she no longer exists for anyone's validation, until she no longer performs femininity as sacrifice, until her silence becomes more articulate than her words ever were. And the man, once enthroned in her imagination, is dethroned, not by betrayal, not by cruelty, but by her indifference, a sacred indifference, the kind that says, "I remember who I was before I needed to be chosen," and in that remembrance, she becomes mystery. And men do not forget mystery. They forget the woman who clung. They forget the woman who begged. They forget the woman who bled herself dry trying to prove she was worthy. But they never forget the woman who left quietly, with her dignity intact, without offering closure. Because she understood the wound was never hers to heal. She becomes the silence that echoes louder than noise, the absence that burns deeper than presence, the question that never gets an answer. She becomes the symbol of everything he wasn't ready to face in himself, and deep in his unconscious, her silhouette lingers, not as punishment but as prophecy, because she didn't just leave, she ascended, and he stayed where he was. That is the ache he cannot name. That is the regret that never resolves. Because he didn't just lose her love. He lost access to the part of himself that was only alive in her presence. And now, he is left with his reflection, unedited, unloved, unseen. And she no longer waits. She no longer watches. She no longer wonders if he'll come back. Because she has remembered something ancient, something divine, that a woman who knows her worth does not chase. She chooses. He may try to fill the void she left with noise, new women, louder laughter, longer nights. But even in the arms of another, he will feel it. The absence that follows him like a shadow. Not just hers, but his own. Because she was the last witness to his potential. The final person who believed in the man beneath the performance. And when she left, she took her belief with her. He may resent her, curse her name, call her cold. But resentment is just a mask for reverence. And coldness, when met with fire, leaves burn marks. He won't admit it, but he checks her silence more than he ever listened to her voice. He replays the last words she said, searching for a clue. But the silence afterward is what screams loudest. He may convince himself she's replaceable, that someone else will take her place. But his nervous system remembers differently. His subconscious remembers the weight of her absence. And there will be moments, quiet, in-between moments, when her name rises uninvited. Moments when the woman beside him feels like a stranger wearing her scent. When the touch is there, but the soul is gone. You see, men don't always regret the leaving. They regret the loss of access. Not to her body, to her energy, to her forgiveness, to the light she kept handing them, even when they didn't ask for it. Until one day, she stopped handing. She stopped softening. She stopped saving. This is where his unraveling begins, because she never asked him to be perfect, only present, only real, only willing to see her as she was, not as who he wanted her to be. And when he couldn't, she didn't scream. She vanished. Jung called it withdrawal of projection, the moment a woman stops carrying the unconscious burdens of a man. The spell breaks, and she sees the boy behind the bravado, the ego behind the tenderness. And with that clarity, she walks away. Not in anger, in awakening. It is a sacred thing when a woman realizes she was never abandoned. She was redirected. Redirected back to herself. Back to the voice she silenced to keep the peace. Back to the self-worth she buried beneath compromise. And from that moment, she no longer seeks his closure. Because the only closure she needed was her own decision. To stop explaining. To stop hoping. To stop holding space for a man who didn't know what to do with it. This is the part where the alchemy begins. The space where silence becomes sacred. Where the absence of his attention makes room for the presence of her soul. Because when a woman disappears the right way, she doesn't just walk into nothingness. She walks into everything she had once abandoned for him. Her art, her fire, her body, her peace. And he feels it. In his bones. In the moments before sleep. In the half-second pauses between conversations. She lives in those pauses. Not as a ghost. As a lesson. Because he didn't just lose her love. He lost the version of himself that was only ever safe in her presence. He lost the sanctuary she became without even asking. He lost the woman who would have stayed if he had only seen her. And by the time he realizes, she's not angry anymore. She's indifferent. And that indifference is irreversible. Because once a woman stops waiting, she becomes unstoppable. And once she stops needing to be chosen, she begins to choose. Disappearance, when done from a place of self-respect rather than resentment, carries a power that no grand exit can rival. It is not the slam of a door, not a final scream echoing through the hallway of heartbreak. It is the stillness, the absence that rearranges the air, the silence that lingers long after her footsteps have faded. And he doesn't realize it at first. Not fully. At first, he confuses her calm with temporary distance, assumes she's playing a game, testing his patience, waiting for him to chase, because he's met women who weaponize their absence, who disappear, not to heal, but to manipulate. But this is different. She's not gone to provoke a response. She's gone because she no longer needs one. There is a kind of vanishing that marks the end of illusion, not just the illusion of love, but the illusion of who he believed he could be without effort, the illusion that she would always be there, waiting with open arms and unspoken forgiveness. But this woman doesn't wait anymore. She remembers now that she was never supposed to be his landing place, only a mirror. And mirrors don't chase the ones who break them. He might find himself scrolling through old conversations, hoping for a breadcrumb, a crack in her silence that gives him a reason to reach out. But he finds none, not because she wants to hurt him, but because she finally wants to protect herself. Because every time she gave him another chance, she abandoned a piece of her own voice. And now she's gathering the pieces, quietly, steadily, without apology. This is the psychology of true detachment. Jung spoke of individuation as the path to wholeness, the integration of all our fragments into one sovereign self. And this woman is no longer fragmented. She is no longer just the nurturer, the forgiver, the dreamer. She has met the shadow side of her longing, and she is no longer ashamed of it. She has seen what happens when her empathy becomes a prison. And now, she is free. Disappearing the right way means leaving not to be chased, but to be reborn. It means cutting the energetic cord without bitterness, because she finally understands. His growth is no longer her responsibility. His inner war is not hers to win, and his inability to love her is not a reflection of her worth, but of his walls. Walls she no longer has the strength or the desire to climb. And so, she walks away. No message, no warning, no performance. Just the quiet certainty that staying would cost her something she can no longer afford to lose, herself. It's in this sacred silence that she finds clarity. Not the kind that screams over the chaos, but the kind that hums underneath everything. She starts hearing her own voice again, the one that always knew, the one that whispered truths even when she was drowning in his absence, waiting for validation that never came. Now she listens, and that voice leads her home. Meanwhile, he begins to feel the shift, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle cracks. A moment where her name comes up and he hesitates. A place they used to visit that now feels hollow. A song that doesn't hit the same because she used to hum along. And suddenly, his memories aren't nostalgic. They're haunted. Haunted by what he didn't say. Haunted by the parts of himself he only met through her. Haunted by the version of her he thought would always stay. Regret, when it arrives, doesn't scream either. It whispers in the pauses. It asks questions he can't answer. Why didn't he call? Why didn't he listen when she was still speaking softly? Why did he let her words pass like wind, only to realize they were maps to intimacy? But by then, she's no longer wondering, no longer doubting. She's not looking back, not checking his silence for hidden meaning. Because disappearing the right way doesn't mean hiding. It means returning to the woman she was before she gave too much, before she confused loyalty with self-abandonment, before she mistook potential for partnership. This disappearance isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of consciousness. And in that consciousness, she becomes untouchable. Not because she's cold, but because she's complete. ChatGPT Janoi, there is a profound difference between disappearance born of desperation and disappearance born of sovereignty. The former is noise, loud and chaotic, a last-ditch attempt to reclaim something slipping away. The latter is sacred silence, deliberate and resolute. It is the space a woman creates when she chooses herself over the story of longing, over the endless cycle of needing and chasing, over the illusion that love is about sacrifice rather than presence. She disappears the right way when she recognizes that her worth was never tethered to his gaze, that her light did not require permission to shine, that her soul's wildness was never meant to be contained by anyone's comfort or fear. And so, she steps away, not as a retreat, but as a rise. She steps into the unknown not because she fears loss, but because she honors the fullness of her being. This act of disappearance becomes a mirror, held up not only to him, but to herself. It reflects back her power, her autonomy, her refusal to shrink for acceptance. She vanishes with grace, with no crumbs left behind, no doors left ajar. And in this vanishing, she becomes a force of nature, unpredictable, uncontainable, unforgotten. The man left behind does not immediately grasp the gravity of what has happened. He is wrapped in ego's cocoon, convinced that time will bend to his will, that absence is simply a temporary void to be filled. But absence, when wielded with intention, is an invitation to reflection. It asks him to confront his shadow, the parts of himself he ignored while she stood at his side. Her disappearance disrupts his narrative. It dismantles the fantasy he built around her presence and forces him into confrontation with his own incompleteness. He begins to see what he avoided, the emotional labor he never performed, the truths he refused to acknowledge, the fears he hid behind. And this realization is the seed of his regret. It is the pain of knowing that what he lost was not just a woman, but a catalyst for his own becoming. The woman who reflected back his potential, who challenged his complacency, who held space for his transformation. The woman who vanished because she chose evolution over stagnation, freedom over fixation. She becomes a legend in his memory, not for what she said, but for what she embodied. The mystery of her departure lingers, an enigma that no apology or explanation can unravel. Her silence speaks louder than any confession. Her absence echoes with the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. And yet, she carries no bitterness. Her heart, once tethered to the idea of us, now beats in the rhythm of self-love. She walks forward, unburdened by the past, anchored in the present. Her disappearance was not an ending, but a beginning, a reclaiming of her narrative, a return to her center. This is the power of disappearing the right way, to leave behind not resentment or accusation, but a legacy of dignity. To make regret inevitable, not through manipulation, but through the unassailable truth of her worth. To show that some departures are not losses, but awakenings. She becomes a beacon for other women, a reminder that to disappear is not to vanish into nothingness, but to reappear as everything, to dissolve the illusion of dependence and emerge whole, sovereign, and radiant. And for him, the man who remains, the lesson is clear and eternal. To lose a woman who disappears with grace is to lose a piece of your own soul. To regret her is to begin the journey toward yourself. Because the woman who disappears the right way is never truly gone. She lives in the spaces where shadows meet light, in the quiet strength that defies the storm, in the freedom that refuses to be reclaimed. She is the echo of all that is wild and wise in the feminine, and he will regret it forever. There is a subtlety in true disappearance that many misunderstand, a nuance that elevates it beyond mere absence into a realm of sacred transformation. It is not a fading away into obscurity or a retreat into bitterness. Rather, it is an intentional unfolding of self that demands reverence, even from those left behind. When a woman disappears the right way, she dissolves into her own becoming, leaving behind a trail of quiet power that he can neither grasp nor forget. This disappearance is a final act of self-possession. It is the woman reclaiming her narrative from the fractured stories told in moments of vulnerability and loss. She withdraws not out of anger, but out of clarity, a clarity born from shadows explored and lessons learned. Jung spoke of the process of individuation as the sacred path of integrating light and darkness within. And in her disappearance, She is completing that integration, choosing herself over the illusion of a fractured love. Her leaving is not an erasure. It is a punctuation mark, a full stop at the end of a sentence that was never truly hers to write. It signals the end of a chapter written in compromise and the beginning of one authored in sovereignty and grace. She walks away with no need to explain, for her silence is the loudest declaration. She has chosen her peace. He, left in the wake of her vanishing, faces a profound reckoning, not just with loss, but with the reflection of himself she leaves behind, a self he may have been blind to, or worse, unwilling to see. This is the place where regret germinates, not from selfishness, but from the deep human recognition of what has been irrevocably altered. The loss is not only of a woman, but of the potential for authentic connection, of the possibility of a love that could have been whole. But regret is a double-edged sword. It wounds and it teaches. It beckons him to the depths of his own shadow, where ego dissolves and humility begins. It asks him to confront the parts of himself that fueled her departure, the fears, the neglect, the unspoken indifference. It is in this shadow work that the seeds of transformation are sown. Yet she does not wait for his awakening. She does not linger in the liminal space of what-ifs or maybes. Her disappearance is her liberation, a step into the vast landscape of her own becoming, where she nurtures the parts of herself that once withered in the shadows of his absence. She tends to her wounds, not with desperation for return, but with fierce love and unshakable respect. In this process, she rediscovers the sacred rhythm of her own soul. She remembers that love is not loss, and that freedom is the foundation of true intimacy. She becomes the woman who holds herself first, who does not measure her value by the echoes of his regret, but by the unyielding light within. Her disappearance becomes a beacon for others who have felt unseen or unchosen, a testament to the power of walking away on one's own terms. It is a declaration that a woman's worth is not contingent on being held, but on holding herself. That true power lies not in clinging, but in releasing, not in pleading, but in trusting. And for him, the man who remains on the other side of this sacred vanishing, the journey is different. His regret may linger as a shadow at the edges of his days, a whisper in the silence of the night. But it is also a call, a summons to awaken, to grow, to face the parts of himself that pushed her away. Whether he answers that call is his choice, but one thing is certain: he will never forget the woman who disappeared the right way. She becomes a myth in his mind, a truth he cannot escape. She teaches him, in her absence, the cost of not choosing fully, and the price of love left unclaimed. And she, radiant in her freedom, walks forward without looking back. Because she has discovered the most profound truth of all: the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.